here. New rulers have come in, destroyed former cities, built their own new cities, sometimes one on top of each other, sometimes, adjacent to each other, sometimes building completely, shifting the capital, building completely new areas. So that's how Delhi has grown. So all the areas which you know as the main monuments today in Delhi, the Old Fort, the Red Fort, Kotla, Mehrauli, Tughlakabad, these are all former capital cities. But all of this actually started here in Mehrauli. So the first capital city of Delhi was in this region. So somewhere around the 11th century. And since then, there have been different rulers who have come in, built around this area. And even when the capital has shifted from Mehrauli to other areas like Kotla or say what is today the Purana Killa area, this has continued to be settled always. So it's not that this area was abandoned once the capital shifted. So what you have here is a continuous settlement from the 11th century, a continuous urban settlement at least, till now. Even now, Mehrauli is an urban village. So what you get is archaeologically an extremely rich area. It's practically littered with monuments. You just walk along and you'll hit a monument every 5 steps. That's how thickly littered this area is with remains of medieval cities. And you're going to look at some of these places today. They're not necessarily in a chronological order. I won't focus too much on the names and dates, but I'll try and give you an overview where we are placed chronologically so that you get an idea where we are historically. And in case you want any more details, please feel free to ask. Okay, come. This way. Wasn't around 8 months ago. In fact, all of this is a recently excavated archaeological site. This courtyard, this clearing you see, has been excavated about 8 months ago or so. And before that, the space between that gateway and this huge building there was all covered with mud and vegetation. All you had was a narrow path leading from that point to this point. It's only now that this area has been dug up. Because of the rains, this vegetation there, but in the summer it was a clearing, and you could see that there are some foundations which have been unearthed over there. Yeah, there's some rooms, some graves which have been found. They found a flooring there, which you can see near the gateway. That's the original paving. And if you look carefully, you might find some pottery shards here and there. I mean, I've collected some. I even found a clay toy here, which I happily pocketed. So it's a minefield of archaeological stuff. You don't have the reports as yet, and probably won't have them for the next 10 years or so. So I think you just have to rely on what I say about this site. You don't wait for ASI to come out with a comment on this. Now what I think is this is a courtyard around which a settlement grew. I'll talk about the settlement a little later when we look at it actually. Yeah? So let's walk to that huge building over there. Here doesn't look very much, but it's one of the most important archaeological features or architectural features here in Mehrauli. And this is a royal tomb, belongs to a sultan called Balban. Now we have this medieval period in history which is a fairly long time period. It starts somewhere around the 12th century and then we go right up till the middle of 19th century. So this is the time, this is 13th century. He has very humble beginnings, and this is also the time when there's a huge, there's a huge amount of political instability. You really don't, once you're a king, you really don't know how long you're going to be on the throne. There might be people who are constantly trying to pull you down. So this is a period of tremendous political instability, and anybody who's on the throne is constantly at fear for his life. Balban somehow managed to reverse that. He did that by killing off everybody who was around him, everybody who could be a potential threat to him, but he still managed to rule for about 70 odd years, which is a huge thing. And this is the time when people are, just dying off after 5 years rule or 3 years rule and so on. So Balban managed to hold on to power for a very, very long time, and he's one of the most important kings we have in the early Sultanate period. And this is his tomb. The grave doesn't exist anymore. But what's important about this place is the fact that this tomb is the earliest structure to use the true arch in its construction. Now any one of you is an architect here? You'd know what the true arch is. Now the correct way of constructing an arch would be that you try and do away with these pillars, too many pillars and flat roofs. What you want to do is, the basic way of constructing is that you have a keystone. Keystone is, it's not very prominent here, but at the center of the arch, the point where the two curves meet, there's an inverted triangular stone. Yeah, that's supposed to be the keystone. The idea is that it holds together everything. Anyone remember the Da Vinci Code? It has a keystone. That's the key to everything. It holds together the plot. Yeah, that's what the keystone does. It holds together everything. So the stones around it are not horizontally placed one on top of each other. They are at an angle. Yeah. So what it does, it divides the weight sideways. Instead of putting the weight on the pillars vertically, it's dividing the weight sideways. So it allows you much more space between your pillars, much more space. You don't see any pillars here, yeah? So that's the way of constructing a true arch. I'm not sure how clear I was, but I just tried to make it, give you the basics of it. There are several variations to it, but you can notice the keystone almost anywhere. So this happens to be the earliest building to use this technique. Before this, we don't use this kind of technique. We just go about putting stones one on top of each other and try and create an arch like that. Which means that those arches could often collapse. So not many stand. Yeah? And this building, of course, would have been grander. There would have been a dome here. There would have been much more decoration, but none of that exists now. Okay.
Was this excavated?
The building is standing, but it has been restored several times, and the most recent restoration was a few months ago only.
Okay, that's when you found out about that.
Yeah. 6 months or 8 months ago. Longer extant. Now this fellow is believed to be his son. His name is Khan Shahid, and he died fighting the Mongols. Now Mongols are a bit of a nuisance at this point of time. They're all over Central Asia. They're troubling the kings here very much, and they're a constant threat. So fighting the Mongols is, the basic preoccupation of all the Sultanate kings. Yeah. This fellow died fighting the Mongols at a very young age. And it is said that Balban, who is believed to be a very, very ruthless king, there's a little bit of plaster work that still remains. The masonry you see now, it's bare minimum. It's not supposed to be like this, yeah? The way we plaster our buildings today, except that we use bricks, the same way, the masonry here is stone. You cover it with plaster. When it is wet, you go about incising it. That's how you get these patterns. And when it's dry, then you paint it. So there's not much left actually. But the next stop, hopefully if it's open and the caretaker is in a good mood, will give us an idea of how things were. And that hint of blue there, that's tile work.
How many sons did Balban have?
I don't know.
Probably he himself might not know because they had so many.
How many wives did he have?
Again, maybe you can, anybody's guess is as good as mine here. Around you, the ruins here, these are remains of a residential settlement. But this settlement is much later in time. The Balban's tomb is 13th century and this is around the 17th century. So it's a difference of 400 years or so. It just goes on to show that there was a continuous settlement here in and around this area. And some of these, what you see here is just, remains of a room. There's not a single complete structure. And a lot of it has been redone. These have been dug out from the ground, and the pavement here, the flooring here has been redone with cement. So not everything is original, but it still gives us an idea of how things were. Like some of these structures are double-storied also. In some structures there were steps. If you notice this portion, you'll see that there's a roof here and there's something above it also. And there are niches like these, which could be for lamps, small spaces for lamps, etc. So this is we're just taking a very good guess here and thinking that okay, this might have been a residential settlement because this is what it looks like, or maybe combine it with a sarai. There is a fair evidence here that this was a fairly active place where people came and went, and there's more than one sarai here. These remains of sarai. So this could have acted as part residence and part sarai sort of a place. But again, we know nothing more than that. Nothing about the time. People who lived here, what did they do? Actually gives the area its local name. This is the Jamali Kamali Mosque and Tomb. But because the caretaker isn't around, what we'll do is we'll carry on, and because we end the walks where the cars are, we'll do this towards the end. That will be a better idea. Instead of waiting for the caretaker to turn up, we'll just carry on. Okay? Has a very interesting and rather funny, weird history. Now we'll jump back forward in time and come towards the end of the Mughal rule in Delhi. So this is the first half of 19th century. This is the time when the British are here. The English East India Company is here, and the Mughals are not doing very well. They're in a very bad position. They are mostly puppet rulers. The Mughal ruler who was the king of the subcontinent, poor chap, is reduced to being the king of Delhi. So that's how badly off they are. And it's the British who pretty much control everything. They're minting coins, they're issuing farmans, orders, and they're giving pension to the Mughal ruler. So that's how the situation is. The English East India Company has planted an ambassador in the Mughal court. William Dalrymple writes a lot about this period in Indian history. His books like The Last Mughal specifically deal with Delhi in this period. So there's a fellow called Thomas Metcalfe who is the resident at the Delhi court. And Metcalfe, he's a bit of a crazy guy, typically British, and he does all sorts of things here. He purchases all this land, what you can see all around you, and the monuments on them. And then he converts it into his estate, calls it Dilkash, and goes about landscaping it. So what he does is, you know, British gardens, when they are landscaped, they go about putting pavilions on them. So these are just structures which have no functional purpose, but to look nice and make the landscape look nice. The structure is called folly, and it's also the act itself, which is full of folly. And these follies are, architecturally speaking, they are made to look like, aesthetically they are made to look like something from a previous era. Flowing somewhere on this side towards the right of this carriageway. Metcalfe, this fellow, diverts the stream towards this side, towards my left, builds this carriageway over it, and this diverted stream is put behind. It's made to flow behind that structure over there. Now this is an already existing structure dated to something somewhere around the 15th century. This is the time when the Lodhis are there. So when Metcalfe came and bought this land, this already existed. And behind this structure is a depression. So the water from the stream collected in that depression and created an artificial lake. And that building, when Metcalfe did that, was standing in water. And Metcalfe called it his boat house. So imagine him having his evening tea there, and whenever he felt like, he just hopped in a boat and went around boating in his lake. If you take a look at these stones here, this one or this one, you can see that this doesn't match with the rest of the masonry. Yeah, it's different. That's because these are reused stones. These stones were originally part of some other building where they would have had this sort of a decoration, and they've just been picked up and used here again. So this is how one identifies whether a stone is reused or not. And if you go to the Qutub complex, it's full of these examples where stones have been reused and put in place here and there. They just don't match with the masonry at all. So this is just another example of reused stones. So let's get out of here. I've been stung by a bee here. Right? Okay, now this is where Metcalfe lived. This is residence. What he did, like I said, he purchased all the ruins, all the buildings along with the land, yeah? Now this was a tomb of a fellow called Muhammad Quli Khan. I'll talk about him a little later. But Metcalfe, when he's around, he happily purchases this land, this monument, this tomb from the descendants of this fellow here, and converts it into his residence. There are all kinds of stories. Some say he put his dining table where the sarcophagus was. Others say he put his billiards table where the grave was. So you just take your pick. But you can see the portions which have been added by Metcalfe. For instance, this particular area, this line marks the original plan of the building, and everything beyond it is an extension. So all of this. The pattern is original, but the paint has been redone just during the Commonwealth Games.
And the one in the center, that's the original.
Yeah, that hasn't been redone. प्लास्टरिंग वगैरह की गई, सब दोबारा की, काफ़ी बुरी हालत में था ये. Okay, another little bit of trivia about this place. Can you see that dome over there, that large? That's Adam Khan. Now Adam Khan and Quli Khan, they are brothers. And I'm sure most of you would remember Adam Khan from the film Jodha Akbar. Yeah, he's Mahamanga's son. So Akbar's foster brother. So that fellow and this chap, they're both foster brothers of Akbar. And that fellow is notorious for the fact that he was thrown down by Akbar from the Agra fort as a punishment. Some of the walls here would have been part of the original, the first city of Delhi, Lal Fort. The city, you can still see some foundation walls there if you go into Mehrauli. Adam Khan's tomb is also on the Lal Fort area. So that means 11th century. and Bauli. Bauli is the Hindi for step well. Rajo is not keen. Rajo comes from the word Raj. It's a form of the word Raj, which comes from Rajgir or Rajmistri, which is masons. So literally, the name for the step well actually translates as mason's step well. Now there is no reason why this should have been said. I mean, there are several stories. Some people say it was used only by masons, or it was used by masons at some point of time, but one really doesn't know. But for sure there are no princesses who took their bath here, or no stories of this sort. Step wells are not meant for bathing. So just, if anybody tries to tell you that there was a royal princess who came here and used to bathe here, don't ever believe them. Step wells are not for bathing. Okay, step wells are mainly for drinking water purposes, yeah. And the basic structure of a step well is common wherever you go. What you have here is you have a well, which is nothing but a deep hole in the ground, right? And that well is just beyond the arches you see over there. Okay, so you first dig a well, and then you build this structure around it. So in fact, all this area is underground. And this is the basic plan for all step wells. You have a basic well, and then around it, they will build stories. It could be covered, it should be various formations, various additions and factors around it. So that's the basic plan. And that niche you see, the first niche in the lowest story there, which is open, that's the connection between the well and the pool here. So that's a common source of water. The well is the actual source of water. That's just a common access. And all these stories are interconnected. So you can walk from one to the other. That's the basic logic of having these stories. Also, a step well is not just for the purposes of utility. It's not just you get drinking water out of it. These are also social spaces. So these galleries, these spaces are also places where people come and socialize. They come here, they chat, or used to at least. And because this is underground, and because this is close to a source of water, this would have been cooler than rest of the surroundings. This step well is dated to early 16th century. And this is actually a whole complex. You have a step well, you have a tomb, and you have a mosque. And there's an inscription on this tomb which gives us the date as the year 1506. So that's what our guess is. We think that this is an entire single complex, and that is why this step well would have been built around that point of time. So that is around the time when Lodhis were here in Delhi. And this is architecture is Mughal architecture, or this is before the Mughals. The Lodhis are before the Mughals, and you place it in the Sultanate period. Yeah? And what we can do is we can actually walk inside the stories. Either you take the staircase there to the well, or there's a staircase here. Walk around it. But be very, very careful. These are narrow stairs. Don't slip. Okay. क्लास है सब लोग आ गए
काफी लोग बैठ गए हैं
So that's okay. I think it's getting tiring now. It's warm. Okay. This is the tomb I mentioned which has the inscription. The inscription is just on the outside. I'll point it out to you in a bit. But what's interesting here is a little bit about the Indo-Islamic architecture which I mentioned earlier. Now, the term Indo-Islamic architecture is actually used for this entire medieval period. Architecture that was done throughout, beginning from the 12th right up to the 19th century. Okay, and there's a simple logic for calling it Indo-Islamic. The thing is that there are some features which are indigenous to the subcontinent and some innovations which came in with Islamic rule. So what the fusion is actually is what is called Indo-Islamic. There's some Indo and some bit of it which is Islamic, yeah? And if I were to point out these features, there'd be things like, indigenous features would be things like the pillar capitals here, or the chhajjas you can see on this mosque. These are very, very typically, Indian. You find it anywhere, and most commonly in Western India now. Yeah? The use of sandstone, the use of floral motifs like lotus flowers, etc. Now, Islamic innovations, one I mentioned was the arch. Yeah? The other one is the dome. And there's a bit of a difficulty when you try and construct a dome. The thing is, the dome is nothing but a circular roof, right? And but the plan on which you have to build this dome is still angular, it's square. So basically what they're trying to do is convert an angular plan into a circular base. And then on that base, you actually go about putting your dome. And you can see this almost everywhere you go. A building which has a dome uses this principle in a basic way. There are of course several variations to it. This is the most basic way of understanding it. And it's actually best illustrated here. The masonry is very clean and nicely defined. So I think the caretaker is back at Jamali Kamali, so we can take a look there and then we'll end our walk. That'll be a bright stuff. That's a mosque. It's an adjacent mosque.
Somebody who planted this tree.
Yes. Maybe.
That's the one who did not allow it to be cut.
Okay, so there's a fellow called Sheikh Fazlullah. He's a Sufi saint and he's also a poet. So he lives around the first quarter of the 16th century. Now his pen name is Jamali. So that's one half of the word Jamali Kamali. So it's Sheikh Fazlullah or Jamali who has built this mosque. And like I said before, this is the Jamali Kamali mosque which gives the neighborhood its name. The park locally is called Jamali Kamali. Nobody calls it the Mehrauli Archaeological Park. Very few people would know it as the archaeological park. It's mostly called Jamali Kamali. Now this mosque was built by Jamali during his lifetime, and this one is considered as one of the good examples of what is called the Indo-Islamic architecture. Yeah, it has survived well, and even better than the mosque is actually his tomb, which is in that chamber. This would probably have been a congregation mosque. It's fairly large, it has a courtyard, and it also has a separate tank. The space you see is not a diving pool, it's actually a wuzu tank. Wuzu is the ablution you do before you go in and pray. Jamali and Kamali both. The central structure, the grave here, would of course be Jamali. In any tomb, the central grave would be of the main person for whom the tomb is built. Now, this is just the fact that we have another grave here is what actually gives us the name Jamali Kamali. We knew that there was a fellow called Jamali, we know he existed, we know what he did, what he was up to. But for this fellow, we have no idea. We don't know his name, we don't know what he's doing here, what he might have been. So that's why the name Jamali Kamali is actually more of a fictitious creation. It's not something which this complex began with. We knew that there was a fellow called Jamali, and probably just to rhyme it well, and we knew that there's another fellow, we just called it Kamali. That's all.
It's a men's.
Yeah. The fact that you see this portion which rises above the grave, that's usually used as a distinguishing feature for male graves. So that's why we think that, of course this is Jamali, we think that this fellow is also a man. Now he could be anyone, a close companion, a friend, a servant, one doesn't know. But the best thing about this place is of course the decoration here. All of this is plaster work. Yeah. At least that's what the restorers claim. Like the conservation reports, they say that we haven't touched it again. So I just take their word for it. And these portions, for instance, this part and this, it's a style work. This, all of this. All of that is style work. And the calligraphy you see just near the ceiling, that band of writing, those are verses written by Jamali himself. And that's his verses which have been put there. So that is his poetry, not Quranic inscription. That's his poetry. The final day, the judgment day, जब हिसाब किताब होगा, so that they have something to speak for themselves, you know, that okay, you have acquired some merit by being very close to a Sufi saint. That's why whenever you go to a dargah, whether it's Nizamuddin or Qutb Sahib, Mehroli, any dargah, besides the main tomb of the saint, there are smaller graves all around. And these are often royal graves. For instance, Nizamuddin has Jahara's tomb. Mehroli Dargah has tombs of later Mughals. So even royalty is vying for a space here. So it's holy ground that we are standing on.